it's another way to tell a story about your child doing the best they
Yeah.
can
Wow.
and wanting to do the right thing, understanding more about what they need.
Welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, the show that gives hope and insight from real voices on the foster and adoption journey. Pull up a chair. We're glad you could join us. Here are your hosts, Mike and Kristen Berry.
Friends, welcome back to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, or welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast. If this is the first time you are joining us, whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, we're glad you guys have chosen to spend some time with us. And listen, if you hear birds chirping, if you hear a gentle breeze, that's because I'm sitting outside on a beautiful June morning here in central Indiana, and it's nice and cool, about 68 degrees. It's a rarity, you guys. It's totally rare. My name is Mike Berry, along with Kristen Berry. We're your hosts for this podcast. And guys, we have got a great show planned for you today. We're in season 22, and this is episode 184, and we are right in the middle of our podcast series called Renew Your Response. And we've been talking about the power behind renewing our response to our children's trauma, to their behaviors. And our guest today is our very good friend, Dr. Laura Anderson, who is actually making her second appearance in this season. It's never been done before. We've never had a repeat guest in the same season. And so we're excited to welcome her back to the show. As you know, if you joined us for the Insight Conference back in April, Dr. Laura Anderson presented on sensory needs and sensory input, and it was an amazing session that she led. And we have her back to talk about renewing our response to our children's sensory needs. So if you have a little guy or a little girl who just seems to move all over the place, makes some strange noises at times, or, kind of uses their body as a battering ram into your body, and you're frustrated by that, this interview is going to give you insight and clarity. Dr. Anderson is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to sensory input. And the best part about it is that she is an adoptive parent herself. She totally gets the journey that we are on. You're going to love her words. We're going to get to that interview here in just a moment. But guys, I want to tell you, right now, as you're listening to this, we have some really exciting news. We are opening up our deep dive online course that helps parents understand trauma, learn how to respond to behaviors, learn co-regulation, re-regulation strategies, how to effectively communicate with caregivers and providers, called Trauma Knowledge Masterclass. We're opening it up today for enrollment, you guys. It's open right now. You can visit traumaknowledgemasterclass.com to learn more about that. And this coming Sunday, June 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are hosting a 100% free webinar. It's a bonus training called How to Heal Broken Attachment and Build a Lifelong Trust with Your Child. You can find out more about that and save your spot by visiting honestlyadoption.com/attachment training. We're also going to put that link in the show notes over at honestlyadoption.com/podcast. Lots of cool things happening. You can also click the link to learn more about Trauma Knowledge Masterclass. And right now we have a really exciting fast action bonus that we're offering. When you join our online course by midnight this Saturday, June 26th. So don't miss that. Save your spot for the webinar. And guys, let's jump into this amazing interview with our good friend, Dr. Anderson. Laura, welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast. It's great to have you back with us.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here too.
Yeah, so audience members, people listening right now are probably familiar. They've heard your voice recently. You were on a podcast episode that we did just a couple of weeks ago, and of course did an amazing presentation on the very topic that we're going to jump into today during the Insight Conference. So we're really happy to have you back, and we are smack in the middle of a podcast series called Renew Your Response. And we wanted to chat about sensory needs, sensory input, really kind of a mysterious topic.
Mysterious, but answers so many questions. And I think most parents are probably like us. They never thought about how the body interacts with the world until there's a problem. And maybe that problem comes in the form of a teacher calling and saying, look, your kid is rolling on the floor or won't keep their hands off other people. Or maybe you're a parent who just, wants your kids to wear a pair of jeans, but their body goes rigid and they're frozen and they can't stand the jeans. And all you're thinking is, dude, like everybody, we're American, we wear jeans.
Yeah.
What is the problem? And so I think probably most parents listening in, if they know anything about any type of sensory input or aversion, it's because you've recognized something's going on. So I'm excited today to talk about this a little bit more and to get your perspective, Laura. If I came to you and said, here's what I'm seeing, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great intro in terms of like what happens for families on this journey is that behavior doesn't match the surroundings, right? Fundamentally, your kid does something that quite frankly makes no sense in our organization of the world, right? Is a fly in the ointment, a behavior that it stops forward motion for the rest of the family, like fighting jeans or, being really irritated by the seams on their socks or, falling off everything and jumping into stuff and ripping things. I mean, like behaviors that one, seem unexpected for what the typical demands are, and two, as I said, are getting in the way of forward motion or come along with big feelings. And I think this is a perfect topic for Renew Your Response, because one of the key takeaways when I work with families about this stuff is that, kids do the best they can with what they have. And so often Renew Your Response things come around the story we tell ourselves about our kids' behavior, right? And people have heard me say this before, but it's key. If you think your child is intentionally being difficult, attention-seeking, those are the two biggest ones that I hear a lot from parents, right? Or like willfully trying to punish you with the noise they're making because they know it irritates you and they're doing it anyway. If that's the story we very quickly tell ourselves, our energy, interestingly enough, is going to come flooding at kids whom, when we understand sensory processing, and I can say a little bit more about that, are going to go straight into flood zone and not be able to think their way out of what they're doing and not regulate, basically not regulate. So sensory needs, the way that I think about them is they often come from dysregulation of the sensory system. The sensory system is exactly that, the part of our body that takes in feedback from the world around us, controls how loudly we're getting it and where the cues are sent, right? It's kind of how I think about it. When your sensory system is working, you don't really notice the ceiling fan on, it's cooling, you're appreciative of that a little bit, you're in a chair, but you don't give a lot of thought to how the material feels against your skin. Your body is sorting the cues through sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and movement in space. So your body sorts the cues and sends what you need where you need it. For kids who have sensory integration difficulties, the cues are either much bigger or much smaller than the rest of us experience them, or they're like just sent funky places. So it leads to a body that is dysregulated because they're having strong reactions to something coming into their sensory being that leads to these behaviors. Like what the behaviors that show up are the response to some internal cueing we can't see as parents.
Yeah. You mentioned the noises, man. It's always like a half an inch from your face too. I bless their heart, but seriously, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I need a little bit of space. And that's the thing. Like, I guess the question that comes to mind for me is that, how do you communicate with a child? Because like for me, I think a lot of parents, their instinct is, dude, read the room, or dude, slide away. We've even caught ourselves saying that before. But I'm wondering, like, okay, so when we're talking about our response, like, what are we on point? I mean, is it in terms of boundaries, like, dude, I need you to slide away from me. I need you to stop making that noise. Is that the best response, or is there something more we can be doing, or something that we're missing in terms of our response? That's like a huge question, I know.
No, but I think that's where, I mean, right? That's what parents need. We're like, what do I do on Tuesday? I think it's a combination of things, right? I think it's getting educated so you can understand that the behavior isn't intended to derail you or the family, right? The intention is not to manipulate or derail the overwhelming majority of the time. Number two is this idea that there will be teaching pieces about that very thing, right? Like, and it really depends on the sensory need of your child. If your child is sensory seeking and doesn't understand boundaries, so they're crashing into you, they stand this close, they sit all over your body, they, that kind of stuff, right?
We're totally identifying with what you're saying.
Right. And if people could see the visuals, they'd see my face all pulled back and my hands in front of me. Like like my response to that is unpleasant. And that's what gets communicated to kids is unpleasant rejection. Right.
Yeah.
So part of it is being able to come up with a common language for you and your child about what the quote, problem behavior is. So we're looking beneath the behavior, as I know you all talk about. We go beyond the behavior and think, is there a sensory need? Is this just that they can't stay in a body bubble, right? Like if we talk about everybody has their bubble, and if you can use bubbles with little kids, and look, they pop if we go through the bubble, mama has a body bubble. Kind of a thing. You just popped mama's body bubble, right? Like teaching them personal space stuff. But I think it's coming up with a common language that is non-judgy, that recognizes there's a sensory need underneath, and then thinking in kid terms, right? Like a body bubble thing, or with noise making stuff, just being able to talk to kids about how it sounds like scream, even though you think you're just talking to mama, it sounds like this, or to dad, it sounds like screaming. Can we turn, I think like if we turn the volume down instead of just saying inside voice, which I've done a million times too, but like with little kids being able to actually do some, some visual stuff with it, some teaching, show the pictures of like, this voice is loud, we need it to be littler. So the first step is understanding that sensory integration stuff is real for a lot of our kids in the adoptive community. There's more and more understanding about the way early attachment and also nervous system development are closely tied with sensory system development. And so if you have a child that had early separation from caregivers and had attachment needs that weren't met to help that sort of brain and nervous and sensory system stuff flow, it's more likely that you may have a child whose body is needing something that is unexpected and that they don't know how to communicate. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, you're right to set a boundary.
Yeah.
The key is to establish a common language and talk about this behavior thing that we're learning. We're going to team up to learn about this voice thing together. So you're working as a team.
I think language is so important. And what we're modeling for our kids becomes the language that they hear inside of their own head. It's the language they're going to use with others and grow up and use with their own children one day. And so when we can practice those things ahead of time, we avoid some of as I'm listening to both of you talk, I'm thinking, yeah, but I don't tell my kid no because I don't want them to think that I don't want to be with them.
Yeah.
So,
So that's a great point. So then the follow-up to that is great. The next point is, right, understanding, I can see, or, I'm wondering if you'd like a snuggle, or I'm wondering if you'd like, here's how I can do it. I can do a big bear hug. I can do 10 high fives, like offer some other way to show some kind of connection. And I think it's an important tool. There's a fine line. sometimes on a bad day, and as parents, we can't center our experience. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I need this, and you need to understand that other people have needs too. That happens and is not ideal. But what you're,
Right.
if you can stay regulated, right? If you're understanding the behavior isn't intentional, if you have a common language and you have done, can stay regulated and say, hey, you know what, Mama would love to spend good time with you right now, but my body bubble just popped, and that makes me jumpy. And so here's how I can show you, or let's do one big bear hug. Would you rather a bear hug or a wheelbarrow? Like part of also understanding is that sometimes kids can't tell us, I'm seeking connection and doing it awkwardly.
Yeah.
So it's also part of knowing, like, generally you have kids who are either more sensory seeking than expected. They need a ton of input to be balanced. Other kids are sensory avoidant to stay balanced, right?
Right.
A lot of our kids in community are a lovely mix of both, depending on how dysregulated or agitated they are. So part of it is knowing, like, hey, when my kid is getting squirrely in my space and is invading my personal space, usually they have a big need for like gross motor movement. Like I need to get them cartwheeling or, pushing the wheelbarrow races in the back, or wheelbarrow racing their siblings across the kitchen before dinner, like whatever, like thinking outside of the box about like, how can I get my kid some sensory input that they need? And certainly part of it for parents is trial and error, but another part, I know, we were talking briefly, occupational therapists who are specifically versed in sensory integration can be super helpful in doing like sensory diet, or they have questionnaires online around sensory diet kinds of things, is the language folks will learn. That'll give parents a little bit of a heads up or a cheat sheet to help them step back and start to see the patterns in what type of sensory dysregulation patterns their child shows and what'll be most helpful.
We were involved with an occupational therapist with one of our children probably a couple of years ago now.
Well, it was right before the pandemic.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because we've had a lot of people reach out over the last couple of years and they've said, like, this is what my child is displaying. What do you recommend? And we're thinking about like our own kid. We're like, well, that sounds very familiar. And we say, like, have you thought about an occupational therapist? It's amazing how many people are like, well, what is that? I've never heard of that. But I can tell you, like, a little bit of solidarity and a little bit of like encouragement. I took our child to an appointment there a couple of times. And when I was in the waiting room, I'm watching all these other kids that their bodies are moving the same, and they're making the same noises, and they're pushing into their parent the same way. And I can see the same look on those parents' faces that's probably been on mine. And it just gave me comfort. It's one of those solidarity moments where you're like, okay, wow, I'm not alone here. We're not the only ones, and there's hope here. Right. There's hope through that,
Yeah, it's seeing the other parents and also seeing the occupational therapist was like, oh, me too. When my kid was 4, and I'd been on IEP teams, I'd been on 504 teams for years as a psychologist. Right. And I thought that occupational therapy was for adult, like car accident victims who needed to relearn to, like, physical therapy and occupational therapy, or for moderate to severe autistic children was what my training had highlighted for me. So I was like, when the occupational therapist started saying, oh, and then I bet he does this too, I was like, is she in my house with mirror?
And can you move to my house and whisper in my ear?
It was really for us during the evaluation, where this occupational therapist was saying, now watch what happens with your child's eyes after we're done spinning.
Yes.
Watch what happens.
Hope-filled, man.
Oh, well, it was just, and it made me think, and this is probably why people don't know about occupational therapy, with an older child of ours, insurance wouldn't cover it. And we didn't know to fight for it, because we kind of saw the benefit, but we didn't really understand it. And then we got like 1 hour a month, and then insurance was like, no, sorry, each session's going to be $500. And we were like, well, we can live, or we can, we didn't really understand
buy
what it was
groceries
for.
or occupational therapy. Yeah.
Right. As time has gone on, we found the benefit to a lot of things we do, whether that's occupational therapy or brain spotting or talk therapy or whatever it is our kids need. There are ways to get things. There are grants. There are, working with a therapist who is just learning. I mean, you can find things, but you got to know that you need to fight for it. And so something like that, once we got to a younger child, we said, nope, we're fighting for it. Who can help us get this? How can we pay for it? How can we afford it? What do we need to do to make this happen? But parents don't know unless they know. And if you're stuck, and when I say, boy, I don't tell my kids no until I tell them no. So last Sunday I said, my niece who's living with us right now said, man, you were cranky on Sunday. And I was like, oh, what makes you say that? And she said, well, you woke up, you looked at all of us and you said, don't touch me. Don't ask me for anything. I'm off duty right now. I don't have any capacity to manage your emotions. She's like talking in my voice.
Just like that. She said it just like that.
But then our niece repeated it back just like that. I was like, wow, you do a really good impression of me. But that's true. And part of that is when I'm not recognizing what's happening in my home, I'm just letting it happen. I've been a jungle gym for a whole week. I've been the co-regulator for a whole week. And all of a sudden by Sunday, I was like, even the Lord took a rest. I have got to stop. But had I thought about it before Sunday, I might have used some of the language that you're talking about. It seems like you need something. I'd love to spend some healthy time with you. My bubble just popped.
Yeah.
Do something different instead. I love creating those kind of phrases because I think I would have hurt less feelings, including my own, throughout the week if I would have said, I recognize this. Do you recognize this? Our kids are a little older, and so they are starting to learn language around their own body. And the more that we teach, the more they're able to say, actually, my body feels like this. Can we just do this instead?
Yeah, and it's scaffolding, and I think this is important for folks seeking occupational therapy too. Where my initial questions are, so do I have to do this every 2 days a week for the till he's 20? Like how does this work exactly? And she was really reassuring, like no, it's it's scaffolding, it's pyramid, and it really is. It's brain bridges. Like you're basically building bridges, and you're building scaffolding to connect those bridges. And all of it, all of the sensory movement, all of the because a lot of sensory stuff also includes some pretty cool attachment pieces, right? If you can stay calm and centered, a lot of sensory input you're giving your kid is from you, with you, in games, in family. So there's an attachment bonus that builds bridges. There is the body piece that builds bridges, and then you've got the language that you're pairing, so that at 7 they're not going to be able to. At 4 they're just gonna, is your engine loud or is your engine quiet, kind of things. But over time you're creating this shared language that matches words, which matches bodies, and I think you have to have a belief. You have to, and I think so here's how I got my belief is that if I had been to helpers or other folks about some of these really challenging behaviors, aggression, the contact thing, stuff that to outsiders look like, your child is striking you. What are you going to do about it so he doesn't do that again? Kind of stuff, and that it would have turned into, and it did. I mean, I talk about, I had points plans and airplanes that changed colors and stars in the universe for safe hands. And all of those things are lovely, but they weren't getting at the underlying need that my child had. They weren't the way in my family with the sensory needs in particular. He was so dysregulated, he couldn't do the anticipation, and he couldn't plan around the stars he wanted. And then we were having epic meltdowns about the stars he didn't get because he couldn't regulate because his body wasn't capable to do the stuff, right? So I think the other piece I would say that's important that I find that parents get a kick out of when I do it with them is this is a nod to also learning about yourself as a sensory being. Because I, like super auditory person, if I'm hopefully this doesn't happen often, but when I'm in a car, if there's something scary, like a near accident, I will cover my ears. I will.
Me too.
Kristen does that too.
Everybody makes fun of me.
am
That's funny.
my eyes are open to a whole new world because I'm like, what are you doing? There's not even any sound. Like
I
it's
don't want to hear. Nope. I
the
don't.
anticipation of it. Yes.
Mhm.
Explain
And I don't
that.
want the memory. I'm an auditory learner and I'm auditorily sensitive. I don't want the memory of the sounds. I don't want
I
the.
feel seen.
I feel seen for you. I'm like, there's another human being that does that?
It is like making me cry because they make fun of me.
I don't make fun of.
They do. All of you
I
do.
do not. The kids look at you like, what a weirdo. What are you doing? And I'm just like, something intense is about to happen. It's kind of like when animals start acting weird before a thunderstorm.
Yeah,
Like I know
yeah.
something's coming on a television show because Kristen just goes like this. Nobody can see me doing this, but
Yeah. Cover the ears.
anyways.
So right, there's a little cue.
Sorry.
If you were
Go
parenting,
on with that.
if you were parenting Kristen, you might realize when Kristen starts to get overactivated, you might want to have some sound canceling headphones because Kristen is going to be easily triggered by what's happening auditorily around her, most likely, right? Is part of what happens if we see that's a big area she takes in sensation. So
Wow.
Or-
That's
right.
fascinating.
So we look, once you start, it's one of those things that once you get a little bit of information about this stuff, you start to see the patterns in touch aversion or textures your child won't have anything to do with. It isn't that they're trying to be a prima donna, it's that they hate the feel of jeans and pockets on their skin. There's something about what the nerve endings and
Yes.
the tactile points are telling them that it is offensive and affront to their
Yeah.
being to have that material near their skin. You start to notice again crashing, banging, that kid who's running into other siblings or too rough with the dog, or like that like need for feedback. It isn't just big movement. Sometimes, and schools do this a lot, when they know they've got a restless kid or a kid who has a lot of extra energy, they're like, run to the flagpole. And that's not a bad thing. Getting out energy, getting your wiggles out is something that schools and families think a lot about. But sometimes the child doesn't have a need for that big gross motor movement, right? Sometimes what they actually need is tactile, deep pressure input, a weighted backpack, a heavy blanket, a bear hug, 3 times in squeezes, burrito wrapping in things like it's watching enough to notice that all of us are different sensory beings. So understanding what really makes you uncomfortable, right? Like sometimes when I come through the door, I can't think to parent until I'm in comfortable clothes. Don't talk to me until I'm in my sweatpants. Like I'm just cranky and I want to get out of anything that's binding anywhere. Like I think these are like knowing what helps soothe you. It comes back to knowing how to stay soothed.
Yeah.
So that
I think it's wonderful that you talk about yourself as a parent. So parents are the ones listening in. The more you know about yourself, I find the more sensitive I am to how my child feels. Yeah. As soon as I think about how do I feel when my pants are too tight, really ticks me off. Anyone who's listened to us forever, that's my go-to answer. If the waistband is touching my stomach, I'm just really ticked off. So if I know that about myself, I can begin to transfer that to whatever's happening with my child.
Yeah.
And I have more compassion. I love at the beginning, you were talking about having those behaviors that are unwanted. We don't want to slam our bodies into people. That's not going to work in the real world. But as a parent, we kind of jump to a reaction. But if we can stop before we react like that and think, what is it I'm looking at? What am I seeing here? I'm seeing a child that needs this pressure, this input. I'm seeing a child who told me 1,000 times he hates the seam on his socks. I knew it. He told me. I can tell he hates these socks. This is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at someone who feels really uncomfortable. And I hate to feel really uncomfortable. What can I do to help? And so I think the more that I can connect how I'm feeling to how my child is feeling, the more compassion I have for what they're feeling and then what they need.
Right. And it's easier to recognize that they're doing the best they can with what they have. And what they have is a nervous and or sensory system that is exaggerating some input that's coming in or is understimulated. And in order to regulate, and that, if you're not a sensory seeker, right? If you're a person who needs more quiet and needs a little bit of stillness or needs personal distance, if you like to avoid sight, sounds, taste, sounds,
Right.
generally speaking, then it's not going to make any sense to you that to calm down your child needs wrestling, or to calm down your child needs to jump on the trampoline. Most parents' first reaction is, what? If I'm suggesting like, half an hour before bedtime, have a pillow fight or whatever, they're like, okay, what kind of quackery is this? And that's not to be recommended for everybody, but when you have a child who needs crash, I mean, sometimes it's also choosing your investments, right?
Right.
Choose those purple gymnastics mats or the blue and red gymnastics mats or whatever, and put your money there and let your kids fall off stuff on there for hours a day when they're younger, because in the long run, you're going to save yourself a lot of behavioral correction if there is a place they can safely jump and smash on something, right? Like there are ways to do that for sure.
I love the word investment.
Yeah. So here's a big question I know a lot of parents have. Our kids are not always going to be in our home, in our care, which a lot of parents are like, that's a good thing in terms of their own sanity. But our kids are going to be out with other caregivers. So a teacher or a coach or a youth pastor or, whoever, the list goes on. And, we've run into this before. We've been called into meetings because so-and-so can't keep their hands to themselves and we don't know how to get them to stop, so we as parents, working with occupational therapists, listening to a podcast like this, gaining the knowledge, that's one thing. How do we communicate that? That's a big thing that we're helping parents with, like, okay, how do you communicate this need to somebody else who's caring for your child or spending time with your child without embarrassing your child, without calling too much attention to the diagnosis, and that's a fine line. Sometimes you just have to be honest, but I'm wondering if you could just speak into that a little bit and help parents that are just wondering, hey, how do I make sure the small group leader understands Susie's, wild movements and things like that,
Right. And I think over the years, there's sort of a range of reactions. I think you highlighted a couple of things, right? Like, how much attention do we call to our kid having different processing needs? How much do we kind of wince and turn away and hope that things go under the radar? I mean, over the years, I think I've learned in talking to families, without getting super pathological, some kind of heads up is helpful. And the energy and how you go toward the small group leader or the camps or the schools, I think, is important. Sometimes you have to fight, absolutely, and there needs clarity. If we're talking about like accommodations and educational plans where your child really needs this level of intervention to help, like the school has to do some training around sensory stuff. I'm not saying there's never a time for fight in advocacy, and the first approach is always just along the lines of like, hey, and I will almost like a debate. It's almost like a debate strategy. I will anticipate what the resistance is or what people outside are probably thinking, because I've done this enough now where I'm like, you know what, this is, it's a tricky conversation to have. I'm not asking for my kid to have a red carpet, and have a totally specialized plan all day at camp. And I know when I talk to folks about this, sometimes initially they're a little bit like, oh, I'm about to hear some excuses for my kid's challenging behavior. Like, I'm not making excuses, but I would like to explain something. There's some explanations for why my kid does what they do that I think will be helpful for you, so that by 2:00 today, you're not, curled up in a ball under the tree. Like, so sort of joining with them about, you respect that they're going to be tasked with managing this for your kid. Humor helps when you can find it. Like being real about the fact that, like, this is going to serve you if you listen here, because if you don't, you are going to, these are the things I've tried. I've tried it all. And here's just this thing you need to know about my kid. As much as they would like to be able to do what everybody's doing, like, they need. And I would start with the needs rather than they are, the sensory stuff. Like they're going to need more, push-ups, handstands, wall sits, or what I find, like every half an hour, if there's any way to send them on an errand by themselves, or like, here,
Yeah.
I packed
Yes.
this, I put some ear pads in, send them away with a crunchy granola bar from the group, like sort of a strategy about like, this is prevention. So
Yeah.
spend your time on this will help you help
Yes.
my kid.
Yeah.
And also just, and I find it helpful using that debate strategy of saying what a person who hasn't yet had the benefit of understanding this information may be thinking, because
Right.
that gives you more credibility, right? Like if you
Yeah.
can predict for them what might go through their mind, because the truth is, wonderful, wonderful human beings, caregivers, grandmas, camp leaders, psychologists, and therapists who haven't had to do this on the day-to-day with a
Right.
being that they love more than anything in the world don't understand this stuff yet. And
Yeah.
so we have to recognize that, right? And try our best to be able to make concrete suggestions for things that we know will help. And I always use, a little bit of joining about how, good luck with this camp, so glad it's you, not me, kind of thank you for everything you're doing. And then lay out some the more specific you can be in the strategies. I think I find that as a place to start. And though, again, I do hats off to folks there isn't always one way to get the communication across. Often it is the scaffolding with the school. It's starting early so that over time and in relationship, people understand your kids' needs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to go with this conversation, because we can begin to watch our kids and understand, begin to do some things naturally at home. Once you've been raising a child for 10 or 12 or 20 years, you look at them and you say, I think you might need such and such, or I already planned for it.
Yeah.
But when you're connecting with other people, someone who's having your kid over for a sleepover, someone who's doing a summer camp, a teacher, and we have found ourselves saying precisely that. Do you want to have success in your classroom? It sounds to me like this behavior is really frustrating. Can we talk about which is more important, not wearing the hoodie in class or wearing the hoodie and having my child be quiet? So, I understand that you have a rule. Can we, the hoodie is making you uncomfortable. Is there a different thing we could do? I'm happy to work with you. I'd love for you to have success in your classroom. Yeah. I understand hoodies are making you uncomfortable. What about some noise canceling headphones? What about a hat? What about, sometimes we can start to think these through. And we're giving the person the benefit of the doubt. And in that particular conversation, I wanted to say, seriously, you want to fight with me over a hoodie? Like, are you having fun? Because it doesn't seem like fun. But that's not what I said, because that's not how we talk in a meeting, in the IEP meeting about my child's hoodie. But the truth is, if we can give the benefit of the doubt, I know you want to be a really good teacher and I want to support your classroom. And my child has a lot of sensory aversion. With that, then you may have some pushback. In that particular situation, the teacher said, well, he's the loudest one in class. Yeah, I know, because the louder and more chaotic it gets and the more that comes into his ears, the louder he gets to try to hear himself think over it. As we had that conversation, and thank goodness we did, some things started to click with the teacher. And that became, we actually offered to buy the noise canceling headphones, but the special education teacher said, look, we've got it in our budget. I'll have a pair for him tomorrow. And so finding those ways to have that conversation is so worth it, because at the end of the day, I want my kid to feel like he was successful at school today. I want the teacher to feel like she likes my kid. I want the teacher to feel successful. Yeah. I want to feel like a good parent. The special education teacher wants to go home at night and say, I helped a kid today. Everybody wants the success. And so when we can sit down and have those conversations, that's the way to go.
Yeah. And I think framing the learning too, I think it's really, I find it's it's humbling and real when you say to teachers, like, 10 years ago, if somebody said this to me, I would have thought they were making excuses for bad behavior, or I would have thought they were taking the, easy way, or I would have thought they were making a big deal out of something that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Again,
Yes.
so I'm like, this is something I had to get to. And so I get it that this may feel like a really different way of thinking about stuff. And I hope we can stay in conversation about it. So it sort of lets people off the, we're in a tricky place, right? Because we're sort of like approaching people who are often experts in what they're doing for our kids, but we have that layer of knowing our kid as an individual and wanting to introduce the idea about the sensory piece that we didn't see at first either, or is new to us, or we don't know how to always anticipate. So I think there's that's a nice way to join for people too, and just say like, hey, this was something I didn't know anything about. And so like once I started seeing it, it's, and it's not the magic wand. That's the other thing I always say to teachers in school, like, boy, I wish I could tell you, I wish that this was the one thing that we could do that would stop the noise. But what I do know is if we're not doing this, this, and this, you and I are going to be having the exact same conversations that, 5 times a week in January as we are in September. So let's try that.
I think we have to remember that sensory is a piece to the puzzle. And just in the same way we would send our kid to school with glasses, if they need glasses, they're going to need that tool, but they're still going to have to learn math. Being able to see the chalkboard, nobody has a chalkboard. I can't believe I said that. Wow. The smart board or whatever it is people do.
Hating us. Donny Osmond, should we talk about the Osmonds?
$1 billion. Smartboard and chalkboard, it's like $1 billion difference right there.
Right. Okay, so whatever it is teachers are writing on.
Yeah.
They're going to have the glasses. Without the glasses, they're not even going to be able to see what's happening. And sensory needs, understanding our body's sensory input, that's a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, it's great. And I think there's I find in these conversations, I think what stood out to me in finding community with other parents, was the hope. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh my gosh, because it can start to feel hard on the day-to-day when things you thought were going to work because, you hadn't had to think about sensory stuff. So the things that families who are raising children that don't have regulation needs can take for granted, that if you have a child that has regulation needs and is doing unexpected stuff, makes you feel like you're failing because you can't figure it out, they're failing. When you find these areas that you're like, you know what, this is a whole thing that I can add into my toolkit. Like if this cuts off 2 of the 12 tricky things that were going to happen, or teaches me how to attach more effectively. As I'm saying, when you've got a deep tissue kid, there's all kinds of ways that you can both soothe and connect in ways that you might not have thought of. So there's a lot of hope around connecting, attaching the story. Like it's another way to tell a story about your child doing the best they can. And wanting to do the right thing, understanding more about what they need, and to be able to renew, right? I mean, like this is if you can step back and be like and remind yourself that it could be a sensory thing and get creative about trying it, then that also, I think, and understand yourself as a sensory being, it allows you to push pause. It allows you to stay connected while you do the teaching. Our kids must learn what is safe and acceptable and okay, but that's more likely to happen through regulation and connection.
Yeah.
And absolutely. Oh, Laura, it's always so good to talk to you. Thank you. You have just given a wealth of information. I know our listeners are going to appreciate it, and I appreciated this conversation as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm thrilled to be paired up and spending time together. It just lights me up to think about connecting with other folks and our kids, and just seeing everybody get closer to thrive feels great. So thank you for doing what you're doing.